Okay, hello everyone. Thank you once again for joining me. I know we've been spending the past month or so talking with other cool writer people. That's how I will call them. And today we have Bonnie Stufflebeam. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing well. Now, do you typically go by Bonnie Joe or Bonnie?
Just Bonnie.
Okay,
You had
okay.
it right.
All right. Well, I think it was on the URL, you had Bonnie Joe, and I was like, that sounds really Southern.
Yeah, I mean, it's my full name, so.
Yeah. So if people use Bonnie Joe, you feel like your mom's calling to you or something?
Yeah, well, I feel like, they think of me as a Southern belle.
Yeah, you're like, just Bonnie. Yes. Now you grew up. A lot of the people that I'm sending this out to in my newsletter and Patreon, a lot of them are from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. You actually grew up in Fort Worth.
I did. I grew up in Fort Worth. Yeah, my parents own 7 acres down in Fort Worth, and so I grew up in Fort Worth, went to Aledo High School,
Nice.
uh, but technically I think that the town where they live is like, it's white settlement,
Yeah.
really.
And then you are now living in Denton.
Yeah.
Very
Yep.
nice. How are things in Denton right now?
They're great. I love Denton. It's like close enough to my family that I can see them.
I think you froze up. Okay.
My sister lives here, so she's just like, "Oh, am I back?"
Yes, you're back.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't do
my
much editing, so it becomes a big sloppy mess, and we all have fun. So
no, that's good. Yeah, so it's great. We have some fun writing stuff that goes on here. There's like a lot of I want to say like kind of amateur writings.
mhm.
It's not like big book events that are going on. It's like Spiderweb Salon. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
I
My
haven't.
friend my friend Courtney Marie runs it, and she gets artists, writers, um, musicians, everyone who wants to participate. Basically, you don't have to be published, you don't have to ever have read before in your life, and she puts together these really cool shows, and everyone comes together and they read and they play, and she does a lot of like cool performance art. Of course, it's all virtual right now, but I'm
Yeah.
sure she'll get started again soon.
Well, and that's so important. I think especially for writers, for there to be, I don't want to say an on-ramp, but something for people who are either writing just for the love of writing and they're not trying to make it a career, or people who are trying, but they need that opportunity to get published or to present or just to stand in front of people and read their work. And I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like Dallas and Fort Worth, we love, whenever we do get published authors and people like that, like we get excited about that. But it seems like a lot of the energy for supporting literary events that cater to the other 99%, it seems like a lot of it has to kind of be created and run by us for it to happen.
Yeah, I feel like that's that's pretty accurate. I mean, there's some cool stuff. There's
Oh,
Deep Elm
absolutely.
books and Interabang books sometimes has some cool events going on. Of course, that's all in Dallas, which is
Yes,
an hour away from the people who are in Fort Worth and Denton. So
absolutely. But if there's one thing I know about Fort Worth and Denton people, it's that they love Fort Worth and Denton. So if you could
yeah.
just like slap a RAR label on it, I think you'd be doing really well.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Here in Denton, it's Armadillo these days. We
Well,
have
there we
a
go.
new brewery opening up.
So no, and actually, I agree with you. I think that Dallas in particular is turning a corner on its. I like the word amateur because it makes me think of the word to do something for the love of it.
Yeah.
But I think that Dallas in particular, there's the writing workshops. I don't know if you've been to any of their happy hours. They're surprisingly fun.
Yeah, no, I haven't been to one of the happy hours yet because it is an hour drive, and happy hour, you want to get a drink there. And so it's like, if I'm going to go, I'm going to need to be there for a few hours because I am a lightweight.
Yeah,
And, even if I have one drink, I probably won't be able to drive. But I have taught some classes for them, and they're really
very
fun.
nice. Very good. And that, yeah, I think that's also a great thing is they've got the programming and the classes and all that. I personally have been very resistant to hang out with other writers, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to sit around and like I don't know, talk about finding agents all day long. And but I actually went and found out that yes, I am not too cool to hang out with other people that do the things I like to do. And it was a lot of fun. So, and now
Yeah.
I'm talking to other writers. See, it's one step at a time, one day at a time.
Yeah,
I
I love talking to other writers. I mean, you meet some writers who are all business and all they want to talk about is finding agents. Then you meet other ones who, yeah, they want to talk about finding agents, but then what they really want to talk about is their favorite books. And like,
yes,
those are my
yes.
favorite conversations.
Same here. I honestly I have such an issue with like Writer's Digest
Mhm.
and sometimes people feel like they're the cover of Writer's Digest. They're like, so tell me 12 ways that you wrote the perfect query letter. I'm like, I don't want to. Or tell me about 5 agents that are interested in the kind of work. I'm like, no, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Let's talk about like, I don't know, some cool writers and stuff that we're reading right now and what you're
Yeah.
working on instead of, I've been working on this book for the past 12 years and I've shopped it around to every single publisher in the world. And I'm like, I just, no, I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
But let's talk about you. I've been, my first experience with your work was on Lightspeed Magazine, which I love
Oh,
Lightspeed. I have a subscription, and it's one of those that I try. I probably read about with each issue. In all honesty, probably read about one story each time they send something out. Like I'll flip through, grab one, read through it, and go. And I found your story, Entanglement,
oh,
which
cool.
has such a great first line. If you'll indulge me, I'm going to read it back to you because I know authors love. But it says, I never met my father, the sea monster, but my mother told me about him. 8 raging tentacles that felt, when she stroked them, like the finest silk, the deep, calm ocean blue of him, the round eyes that revealed secrets in their reflections. And that's such a great first line that I was like, okay, I got to read the rest of this. When
I'm
when you
glad.
were writing it, did it kind of start with that first line, or was it more just I like the idea of taking the father and making him a literal sea monster and kind of playing with that? Where, if you remember writing that one, where did that one come from? Do you think?
I think it started with therapy.
Yeah.
And talking about entanglement and being entangled with one's family and you know I go to therapy. I'm a huge proponent of therapy. I think you know
Wonderful.
it's super helpful for anyone, you know, even if you
Yeah.
don't struggle with anxiety and depression. Like just one little therapy appointment in your life is a lot, is
Completely
great
agree.
to, yeah, open you up. And um so you know in therapy sometimes I start to make metaphors out of what my therapist is telling me, and she was talking about you know untangling yourself from the things that your family's given you, and that's always kind of been a theme in my writing, but in this case I just had this immediate literal image of like what if there was something actually wrapped around inside of a person that was their family. And so then it kind of you know I imagine like tentacles, and from there sea monster was just a natural second step.
Yeah, it's the old Lovecraftian family drama
Yeah.
we deal with. Well, and I guess that's part of what I liked about it was the literalism of it.
Mhm.
It was, and the matter of factness. Um, it seems like having read some of your stuff, humor plays a big role in what you write. And obviously, I found it to be a touching story, but also it's a funny story. Um,
Okay.
do you find I don't know, do you find that it's just kind of just a natural part of your voice, the humor? I know a lot of writers don't want to like be tied down to genre or anything like that. But do you find yourself being more of a fantasy writer who writes humor, more of a humor writer who writes fantasy, or are you just kind of like, I write whatever comes to me?
All right, whatever genre, but I do, I mean, I do have a few stories that are just dark, and I don't think there's a lot of humor in them. But my
Yeah,
favorite stories, the ones that were the most fun to write and the ones that I'm most proud of, are usually the ones that have some element of humor. And I think that's because, you know, my favorite genre to watch is humor. You know, I mostly watch comedies, and you know, whether that be horror comedies or sci-fi comedies or you know rom-coms. You know, I feel like I'm just like a very, you know, like I love to crack jokes and make up funny songs and stuff, and so that is a very natural part of my voice. I'm really glad that comes through because I do sometimes wonder. It's so hard
Yeah.
writing humor because people's senses of humor are so different. The first story I got published in a pro magazine was in Clark's World. It's called The Wonders, and it was this like dark humor piece that had all these references to pop culture. It's these aliens, it's kind of Galaxy Questian. These aliens have been watching our transmissions and they think that they're real, and they come here and they realize that there's been kind of an apocalypse and they're searching around for us. And so the aliens, you know, have this kind of funny voice. They don't really understand what's really happening at all, and they don't really understand pop culture, but they kind of think they do. And so, you know, I was throwing in all these references and all these little jokes. And I remember this one reviewer wrote that I was trying too hard to be clever.
Oh, jeez.
And of course I read that and I was like, oh, I wasn't trying too hard to be clever. I'm just clever.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing that I find that's always really interesting is I think that when it comes to being funny, like I would hate being labeled as a humor writer. Like that would scare me to death because I've had people say that my stuff is funny, but I
Mhm.
wouldn't want to be a humor writer because then I'm like, oh gosh, do I have to like make sure there's like a joke density of like 5 ha-has per page, and I can I can stumble into like I get irony. Like in fact, that
Yeah,
was the thing my ex-wife once told me. She goes, "You're not funny. You just get irony really well." And I was like, "Okay, I'll take that."
take it.
But like,
Yeah.
did you? I mean, and I guess that's one of those things is I do find that, and I'm going to pick on the male species for just a second, if you don't mind. But I find that a lot of men in particular think that they're funny when all they're doing is just wearing a funny T-shirt or they're quoting a funny movie. And I'm like, you're not funny, you're just pointing at funny
Yeah.
and then kind of claiming it as your own. And women do that too, but I think men in particular, there was a dark era, the Anchorman years, where it just felt like
Oh, yeah,
all
yeah.
these people were just quoting movies. And I'm like,
Hmm.
yeah, that was funny, but you're not. Like, at what
But
point,
that's
like,
what she said
oh
kind of
gosh,
situation.
yeah, yeah, I'm like, this is gimmicky, and it's not funny. It's just, yeah, you pointed to it, and I was like, so at what point did you kind of realize, like, oh, I can, like, just did you just kind of did you always know that you had a good sense of comedy, or was it more just this is my voice and I hope that people laugh at it?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I've always been a ham.
Yeah.
Even when I was little, like I would do things, little tiny pranks. Every time I go to my sister's house, I write red rum on her mirror. Just like little things like that. And I think it kind of runs in my family. So everyone in my family is pretty funny, pretty clever. I didn't know if it would translate into writing,
Yeah.
and you know, I don't feel like that was ever something that I like tried to do. I think it's just something that has naturally happened.
Yeah, I had a moment where my wife number two, bless her, she was reading one of my stories and she laughed while she was reading. I was like, wait, well, hold on. What was that? What did you just read? And she's like, oh, this one part, it was funny. I was like, really? It was? And she's like,
Huh?
yeah. I was like, oh, okay, all right, cool.
It's
And
so
then she,
funny how, and then she what? Sorry.
oh, and then she went back to reading. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's so funny how you don't, sometimes you don't realize that you're putting certain things into your work, and then someone else reads it and, you know, they find something. Like my partner has been reading some of my work and he's always grimacing. And I'm like, what is going on? He's like, you're weird with food. He says like you put food in all your work, but it's not like good food. It's always really grotesque, disgusting food that these people are eating. And I was like, oh, I have no idea what that's about. I think it just fascinates me that like I don't know, gross food is a thing. Like it's this very visceral reaction.
Did you did you ever read the book This Is How You Lose the Time War?
I did, yeah.
It has one of the most disgusting explanations of how eating works that I think I've ever read.
That's
And I wish I could remember it word for word, but it was one of those things where I was like, oh gosh, eating's gross.
yeah.
This is this odd thing that we do. That's funny that he picked up on that. So like,
Hmm.
oh, I guess that's a thing I do.
Yeah.
So you, I was once again my friend the internet here. The Wonders you published in 2013, and you've got some other stuff that you had in 2012. When did you start? I know the question, when did you start writing? I'm sure the answer to that is like, well, as soon as I could hold a pencil. But like, at what point did you go, okay, I'm going to try to get this stuff published and I'm going to just start cranking stories out, because you've got a lot of short stories that
Hmm.
you've published in the past few years. When did that point come for you?
Well, so I found out that you could major in creative writing when I was in high school. And in middle school, I had really started, my main hobby was writing. I would sit down and I would write, and I never finished anything. And it was all very angsty teen stories. And it really helped me, get out that teen angst. Um, in high school, I continued writing and really loved it, but it was like, what do you even do with that? Um, and so I thought I would own a coffee shop and I would study business in school, and had these ideas, not even knowing what it's like to run a coffee shop, and then it's your whole damn life. And then I found out you could major in creative writing, and I was like, oh shit, yes. So I just went ahead and did that without even thinking like, what would I do? I thought maybe I'll teach or something like that. Um, and then, they kind of mentioned publication in my workshops. And so I sent out some of my short stories to some contests, and they all came back with rejections. And so I kind of put that off for a little while, and then uh, wanted to do an MFA. And it was actually in my MFA, which had a popular fiction focus, that I started to learn about science fiction and fantasy writing. I mean, I was reading science fiction and fantasy, but I had never thought like, oh, I'm writing science fiction and fantasy. And I didn't realize that there was this whole wealth of sci-fi fantasy that flew a little bit under the mainstream radar. I thought, Neil Gaiman, Kurt Vonnegut, all the white dudes,
Yeah,
basically, they were sci-fi fantasy, but I didn't know about Ursula K. Le Guin. I didn't know about,
she's amazing.
yeah,
My gosh, she's so great.
yeah. I didn't know about Octavia Butler. I didn't know about
Also,
these women who were doing really cool stuff. And so when I started to discover them, I was like, oh, yes, no, I'm writing sci-fi fantasy.
yeah.
And so I chose that track in my MFA, and they really started to teach us about submitting your work. And so I discovered the wealth of sci-fi fantasy magazines, and then started submitting my work at that point. But in terms of, cranking out stories, I kind of drank the Kool-Aid a little bit with the, you must write 1,000 words a day or else you will fail.
Yeah.
And so for a
Theory's a
long
good
time,
motivator, though.
yeah, and it was, but it eventually, it wasn't a healthy motivator for me. It was like I felt very guilty and had all this anxiety about writing. So I was like, I must get 1,000 words a day. All the greatest people say you must have 1,000 words a day. And so, I mean, I was able to write so many stories, and I still have, probably 30 stories or something that I've never even touched that I wrote during that time. Um, but eventually I had to like back off a little bit and be like, okay, if you want to write every day, that's cool, but maybe like just be okay with getting, 200 words if you're having a bad day, or taking a day off every now and then.
You don't have to be like Stephen King with his 2,000 words a day, and I write even on my birthday.
Yeah, exactly. Take your birthday off. I mean, unless you really, really want to write on your birthday. But I do, I take Christmas off because
Yeah.
I want to hang out with my fam.
Well, and you talk a little bit about the influence of women who are writing in sci-fi. I actually discovered Ursula Le Guin really late in life, and I
Mhm.
got mad when I first read her, because I was like, why haven't I been reading her my whole life? Like, I was like,
Yeah.
it was like I just discovered my favorite author, and I'm like, I have wasted the last 43 years of my life not reading her.
Hmm. I felt the same way. I was like, why has no one talked to me about, Kelly Link?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, she's a badass.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I feel like, yeah, it's one of those things, particularly in sci-fi and fantasy, that there's so many good writers,
Mhm.
but we're not pushing them out there. We know about George R. R. Martin. We know about, you know, once again, the long shadow that is Gaiman and Stephen King and all
Mhm.
these people. But yeah, I get really excited. Like Robin Hobb is, I love her fantasy, and it's like, I know it's not really her name, but in my head she's always Robin. And yeah, it's just some really really good writers out there that just feels like if people only knew.
Mhm.
Like,
Well, yeah, I mean, I was assigned a Vonnegut book in high school, and I was assigned, luckily, we did read Margaret Atwood. So I knew about Margaret Atwood in high school, but mostly we were assigned the male science fiction writers in high school if we read any sci-fi at all. So,
yeah, which is such a shame. I mean, they're fine, but there's so many good
yeah.
things out there. Now, with your writing education, what do you think you took out of that, the MFA in particular? I don't want to put too much pressure on the undergrad, but like with your MFA, like what do you feel like it delivered for you? Was it the discipline? Was it kind of insider knowledge? Well, I mean, or was it all of that?
Yeah, I already had the discipline, which is
Yeah.
why low residency MFA actually worked for me. I feel like the main thing was like the mentorship with an established writer, and then also the network. So, the people that I went to high school with are the people who are starting to do really cool things now. They're opening presses, they're publishing, they're, running podcasts. And so now I just immediately, not having been in the sci-fi world at all of a sudden I had all of these friends who were very into sci-fi fantasy. They were throwing books my way. They were telling me about which magazines to submit to. So I feel like, the MFA experience is a really great shortcut to kind of get that network going. But I do, people ask me all the time, should I get an MFA? And I say, like, well, it is very expensive. And if you are not planning on teaching, really kind of think about why you want it. And if it is because you feel like you want to jump ahead in your career, there are ways that you can kind of, make a network and make a little friend group, and read books on your own and develop discipline on your own. Like you can totally do it without paying all that money.
Yeah. No, I had a little bit more of a, like in my undergrad experience with creative writing was a lot of like dream journaling and getting your feelings out on the page. And I was much more of a, I want to talk about the craft. I want to like write a solid sentence that I can feel proud of. And I wasn't getting a lot of that. So for me, a lot of my education just came through reading books on the writing
Hmm.
process, and some really boring ones at that. Like they weren't always the thrilling, memoir that reveals all these truths about writing. It was sometimes just, what does an active voice look like when you're writing? And
Strunk and white.
yeah, I mean, yeah, these things are not necessarily page turners, but when you're trying to figure out how to get your writing together, it helps. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I've always eyed that MFA, and it does seem like one of those things where if you're able to go for it, like that's really awesome that you were able to work through that and get that out there.
Yeah, luckily I had some of my parents' support, so
Yeah.
they were helping me with my bills back then, and they still do pay. I just have a small student loan from it, so
We
they
all
do
do.
still help me with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and then, and of course, it shows in your writing. I don't want to just spend, I mean, we're going to wrap up in just a little bit, but I mean, your writing from just even a technical standpoint is just really like solid. I never really felt like when I was reading any of your work that it was, yeah, it just had this sort of, the nuts and bolts were just really well put together. Um,
Thank you.
and and yeah, I don't want to pick on the amateurs because I think we're all, I'm still at the stage where I'm getting very polite rejection letters from everyone. Um, but like, but yeah, it feels like that technical writing, you've got it there, and I'm sure also it's just writing every day probably helps you as well with that.
Yeah, for sure. And then I I was also a poet. Like I wrote a lot of poems, so I feel like the music of language has always fascinated me. So I've always kind of focused a lot on that. But I agree, like there's nothing wrong with someone who just wants to pick up a pen and write the sloppiest sentences that they possibly can. Like, I mean, I listen to punk music that was recorded on tape cassette, you know. I don't think everything has to be super polished and great.
Well, and you mentioned, oh, sorry.
I don't think everything has to be super polished to be great.
That's true. Well, and I can see that poetry influence. As my day job, I work in marketing, and there's so many times in marketing where I'm like, I think about the movie Contact, and I'm like, they should have sent a poet, because like so much of what I do is you've got this much space, and you need to communicate all this information. And I'm like, yep, I could see how poets would actually do really well in this instance, but me, I need like this much space to say this much. So I'm like, uh,
It's
but
a
yeah,
skill, learning
it
to
is.
write compactly.
Yeah. Now, would you? I know that you've published poetry as well. Are you kind of 50-50 with what you do with that? Is it more just today I feel more poetic like, or more prose? Like, is it a struggle, or I guess it all goes together?
Yeah, no, I'm mostly a prose writer. It's just every now and then, like, I'll get very emotional and I'll want to write just a poem.
Yeah.
I think poetry has more always been like my therapy than my craft.
Yeah. Now, let me ask this. You write a lot of short stories. Is it true that you're working on something a little bit longer, that you just finished something that is perhaps novella length?
Yeah, so I have actually been, you know, trying to get a novel published for years, and it just hasn't happened yet. Like I've had two make the rounds at publishers and, you know, get summarily rejected. And so, yeah, I just finished a novella. And so now I'm trying to get a new agent. So I'm shopping that around to agents, and I'm also working on another novel. So I've probably written 5 or 6 novels so far, and this will be like my seventh. I mean, I'm trying really hard. I kind of think of it as like, if you're not getting rejected, you're not aiming high enough, right?
Yeah,
And so with my short stories, I mean, I do still get rejected, but it's like I was getting accepted more and more. And so it started to feel like, okay, well, now it's time to challenge myself with maybe another length. So
now that's great. I mean, I'm not going to go into give us 12 ways that you try to find a literary agent, but let me ask about that just a little bit. I've had agents before, and they did not work out. And so what I found is that getting an agent is a challenge, but getting the right agent,
mhm.
people don't think about. They're like, I got an agent, I won. And I'm like, no, no. Sometimes it's not a good fit, and sometimes it doesn't guarantee the success that you wanted. So you don't need a dish or anything like that, but was it just simply a matter of being like, okay, I need to find the right fit, or was it just kind of looking around going, okay, I just someone who would be good for this book?
Yeah. So I've had 2 agents,
Mhm.
and just recently left my second one. And I mean, there have been multiple reasons for both of it. And it just so happened that I was at a point in that process where we had reached kind of the end of the line with the book, and I didn't fire my agents because they didn't sell my book. I, you know, fired them for other reasons. But you know, they didn't sell my book, and so I agree. It is definitely finding the right fit. You know, I don't want to get, you know, too into it because I don't want to insult
Of
any.
course.
But you know, the first agent just really wasn't as well versed in sci-fi fantasy as I thought. You know, we had those conversations, and she said, "Well, I see you kind of as a literary writer who straddles genres," and I said, "That's great. You know, I see myself as that too." But it turned out that she knew the literary side really well, and she didn't know the science fiction fantasy side very well, and that became very apparent. And so when I was nominated for the Nebula, I was like, okay, you know,
Congrats, by
I
the way.
thank you. So you know, I can do this sci-fi fantasy thing, but like I'm publishing in sci-fi fantasy magazines. I really do need someone who understands that side of the genre. Um, so it was just a bad fit. And my second agent kind of moved on to nonfiction. He reps a lot of reality TV stars, and so he's kind of focusing more on that. Um,
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was I had written something a few years ago that got really popular on the internet, and he wanted to represent. He's like, okay, do this, but as a book. And I started working on it. I was like, I don't like doing this. Like, I don't want to write this as a book because there's a reason why I wrote it as an article. And so,
mhm,
and it was kind of the same thing. I was like, we parted not because he was not a good agent. It was just more like this is not the writing career that I want to have.
mhm,
And I do find that a lot of people in kind of their desperation to find an agent will just take a shotgun approach and just blast out to anyone that will receive their manuscript. And it's like, if that person doesn't have an interest in, you know, Tor or, you know, any of the Del Rey or anything like that, then you
yeah.
know, you're barking up the wrong tree in some ways.
And the other thing is, a bad agent can kind of do you more harm than good, because if editors don't want to work with an agent for whatever reason, they're not pleasant to work with, they're pushy, whatever, your book could be really great, and those publishers are going to be turning it down.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine back in 2013, I mean, you had kind of a different lay of the land than you do now, where you probably know agents where you're like, oh man, I would love to work with that person, or
Yeah.
this person. Like, there are certain names that just keep popping up.
And then there's certain names that I have on a list that it's like, I've heard bad things.
Yeah.
These people harass other people, they're behave poorly at parties.
Yeah.
Nope.
So yeah, it's good to kind of as you're working, you get to know people.
Mhm.
Now, let me ask this. I've never been to a writers conference. I'm still getting used to being in the same room with other writers.
Uh-huh.
I'm working on it. Um, have you done any of those? Is that something that you found help? Like, is most of your interactions with other writers online? Like, kind of how have you made the rounds with meeting people?
No, I love going to conferences. They're exhausting,
Yeah.
especially if you're traveling to a new city, but they're so much fun. And I've made so many great friends from traveling to conferences. I try to go, if there's anyone that travels to Texas, sometimes World Fantasy Con, yeah, World Fantasies come here. Worldcon was here. And so I went to both of those when they were down in San Antonio. Um, and then I try to go to some other ones. I try to hit at least one that's in another state per year. I can, just because it's fun to travel, and it's fun to see a new city, and especially when your companions are other writers. And yeah, so I really like conferences, and I try to get on panels if I can, mostly because usually if you're on a panel, you'll get your conference fee comped. It's not always
Nice.
the case, but it's nice when that happens.
That is. Well, and so yeah, I've looked at some of those conferences, and then of course COVID hit, and I was like, yeah, I'll wait till next year. But so you would recommend the World Fantasy conventions? Any others? You said the Worldcon for you was a big one.
Well, honestly, World Fantasy has had some issues with being. They've had some issues with their panels. They aren't hearing what people are saying about like being super inclusive and really watching the language. So World Fantasy is fun, yeah, but make double sure that it's like a good year where good people are running it. But yeah, I definitely, Worldcon is cool. I mean, they all have their problems, and problems arise, and there's always some controversy going on in the sci-fi fantasy community. The Nebulas are a really great conference. They're a little bit smaller than Worldcon, and the people who go there are usually pretty serious about writing, and the panels are usually very informative, and it's not the same stuff that you see at all the other conferences. So I definitely recommend the Nebulas. And then just any of the local cons. I've made a lot of great friends going to Armadillo Con down in Austin.
Nice.
And let's see, there are two that are in Dallas and Fort Worth, and one of them just closed up shop.
Was it FenCon?
I think FinCon might still be going, but
Yeah.
DFWCon just closed.
Okay.
And you
Yeah.
also see slightly predatory conferences where they're charging people like $400 to attend.
Yeah.
And it's like, you can have a meeting with an agent if you attend this conference. And I feel like that's a lot of money. So I don't always recommend those, but I do say, like, if you have any expertise, like, marketing, writing, if you have, even if you're not published, like, you can find some way to get on a panel, just, reach out to the organizers of a conference and say, hey, I'm a marketer. I could teach marketing from a writer's perspective. And
Yeah.
oftentimes they'll put you on a panel and comp you.
Yeah. See, that's great. I was, before I got into what I'm working on now, I was in comics and I went to San Diego about 4 years in a row. And I found the
Mhm.
biggest benefit of that was actually just the bar afterwards
Yeah.
and just hanging out with people, meeting people, talking. Um,
Mhm.
and that in itself, just making some of those friendships was a lot bigger than, sitting at a table with my comics and being like, here. like,
Yeah, tabling is hard because you don't get to be in the bar as often. You don't get to, go to the you don't get to tag along to the group of writers who are going to the art museum down the street. I don't usually table because I do feel like it kind of hymns me in.
yeah.
Um, but there's something to be said for BarCon, You don't always have to pay the conference fee. You can just go to the city and stay in the hotel where the con is happening and hang out at the bar.
And just tie a little string. You're like, here's my bracelet I've got. But yeah, I've gone to South by Southwest. I was like, I don't need a badge. I'll just
Yeah,
stand out here until they eventually let me in, and that seems to
yeah.
work.
Well, the cool thing is you don't usually need a badge to get into the bar of the hotel.
See, there you go. We're learning all sorts of great things here. So, well, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I wanted to thank you so much for jumping on here and saying hi and talking a little bit about writing and conferences and
Yeah.
agents and all of that fun stuff. So, real quick, can you give me website, Twitter, and then just something that people can look forward to coming soon from you? Because I know that you're always working on stuff. So kind of what's next? Actually, we didn't get to talk a whole lot about the novellas. Real quick, are you able to
Oh,
tell
yeah.
us like a little bit about the novella that you're pushing right now, or is it
Yeah.
completely secret?
No, it's not because I just had. Well, here's my thing to not look forward to, but that you can check out now. Is I just had a novelette in the anthology Evil in Technicolor. It's
Nice.
my friend Joe McDermott just started a new press, and it's pretty cool. It's called Vernacular Books, and he put out this anthology of Hammer horror inspired novelettes. And so I watched a lot of Hammer horror. I had never really seen any of it. And so I, got really invested in the female monsters of Hammer horror and also kind of the differences between the old Dracula and the new Dracula. So I wrote this story. It's kind of metafictive and funny and also horrific. It's got some body horror in there. So if you're squeamish, maybe don't read this one. But it's about old Dracula wakes up and he's in new Dracula's world and it's all Technicolor and it's kind of Pleasantville-y. And he realizes that the new monsters, the female monsters, the Carmilla type, and then the Gorgon and the Mix Hyde, who is, part, let's see, Sister Hyde and part Dr. Jekyll. They have kind of become the new monsters who are feared and who are being hunted by the Van Helsing analog. And so, new Dracula and old Dracula team up to try to become the monsters that are feared again, basically. And so, I wrote that novelette and it was so much fun and it got a really good response. And I just couldn't stop thinking about this girl gang of queer lady monsters, and so I ended up writing a whole novella that is about them. It's actually from the lesbian vampire's point of view, and she's very rash and she loves her friends, but she also just loves to cause chaos, and so those two things kind of clash. and she resurrects her friends and then is supposed to not kill any innocent people until she can fight these 3 other monsters in order to satisfy the guardian of the underworld, who says, hey, you know, you stole your friends from the underworld. I need you to give me three equally evil monsters. And so it's about her journey trying to murder some monsters with her friends.
Oh, good old times. That
Yeah.
that sounds great, and I can't wait to read that when it does come out. And then website, Twitter, any of those things
It's,
you want to throw up?
yeah, BonnieJoStufflebeam.com. I always make this joke, but I am one of 2 Bonnie Stufflebeams in the world. The other one is in Iowa and does not have an online presence. So you can put my name into Google and I will pop right up.
There we
Um,
go. And I'll make
my
sure to
Twitter,
post the link below so people can
yeah,
check out
my
your stuff.
my Twitter is just Bonnie Jo Stuffle because they
Yeah,
wouldn't let me put the whole name.
you got condensed there. So, well, Bonnie, thanks again. I really appreciate you taking the time, and everyone check out her work. You will not be disappointed. Great stuff from a Dallas Fort Worth, Denton, North Texas writer. So you take care and have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, you too.